We were always very involved in discussions from a very early age. So, sitting around the kitchen table, Dad was very open and transparent in the good times, but also the bad times. And, there were plenty of both. We'd talk about the markets. I bought my first shares, I think, at the age of 6 or 7. And I've just done the same with my son, Harry, which I'd love to chat about.
Yes, let's talk about that. Yeah.
And so it was sort of always part of the conversation. And so business, again, I said I've worked with Dad for 43 years. It was sort of discussed at the kitchen table. It wasn't the only topic, clearly, but it does become, or it's more natural than maybe it is for some others, where they go through life not really understanding maybe their parents' situation, or what they do as an occupation, or whether they're wealthy or not.
In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Heine, Joint Managing Director of Netwealth. We speak about young entrepreneurs and the ability of a family to transfer wealth creation education from one generation to the next generation. We talk about managing and dealing with the challenges of an ASX-listed company, whilst also being attentive with a young family. We talk about teaching children financial concepts at a very young age. We even get a chance to talk about sea monkeys for just a little bit. If you love this episode, please like, share, and review our podcast if you can. We'd really appreciate it. Now to the episode. Right, so we're joined by the Joint Managing Director of Netwealth, Matt Heine. How are you, Matt?
I'm great, Joe. Great to see you and great to be on the podcast.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like I was reflecting on your journey and my journey. It's kind of 20 years probably that I've known you, and you starting in Netwealth very green. How's that journey been? There's been many iterations, I imagine.
Green's probably an understatement. I was actually chatting to someone on a panel last night, and they asked me the question without notice, and they said, What advice would you give to a 25-year-old entrepreneur? And I had to pause and think about it for a moment. And I responded by saying I'm probably not qualified to answer that, because I've only ever had 2 jobs. One was working for a couple of years in the kitchen at Nando's, and the second one is with my current employer, Netwealth. So it's been a great journey. I don't think anyone goes into a job at the age of 19 or 20 thinking that they're going to be there for 22 years. Yeah. But as far as an education and business goes, you couldn't ask for anything better. I was the 5th employee at Netwealth, and as you'd well know from the early days, we were doing everything from answering the phone to opening mail to designing banner ads, writing privacy statements, that the list goes on. So you really do get an opportunity to be across every part of the business. Clearly that gets harder as businesses grow, but no, it's been a fun journey, and fortunately we've been successful along the way.
I suppose so one of the benefits is the track record, and being able to look over the journey at the different things that you've done and the changes, and to be able to share that with your father and the family is I suppose something that's really rewarding.
Absolutely, and he's been great to work with, been a great mentor, and often families don't work together all that well, and when we sort of look back on why did it work so well, particularly during a pretty tough 6-7 years as we tried to get the business started. I was very green, as you mentioned. Like to think I've got a little bit more under my belt now, but it really was around having a lot of freedom within boundaries, and having that adult supervision, if you like. So I was able to go out, try things, test things, do new things without being able to obviously bring the company down or create real damage to the business. But when you're younger, I think one of the benefits is you go into things without the preconceived barriers. So where past experiences might provide great insights and wisdom, equally it can also create barriers that can be hard to overcome if you've had failure or had things not working your way in the past. So in many regards, I think having the young bull, old bull is a real benefit, and that I think has been really important to our success.
Mm-hmm. And tell maybe the listeners a little bit more. I certainly know, but what is Netwealth, and what do they do?
Yeah, so Netwealth is a fintech or a wealth tech business. That sounds far cooler than a superannuation business. But we provide a technology platform and administration solution primarily through financial advisors for the benefit of their clients. And we basically facilitate and allow people to transact into a whole range of assets. They could be local assets, so managed funds, shares listed on the ASX. It could be more sophisticated funds, or it could be directly trading into foreign domiciled markets, so the US, Canada, the UK, etc. So we actually allow trading into 16 different exchanges, bonds, and we then make that really easy for a client through a single account. So rather than having to deal with multiple parties and then collect all of the statements at the end of the year, that's all done through us, and we provide a consolidated tax position and ongoing reporting.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, it might be a bit simplistic, but when I think about Netwealth, it's like you said, a wealth tech platform. That idea is, I think, came quite early to you in Netwealth compared to some of your competitors potentially, and as part of the differentiated approach that you invested quite heavily in technology quite early, whereas others perhaps kept on thinking about themselves in the old, we're the superannuation fund. Would that be true?
Yeah, I think so. People have often described what we do in the past as like a fund supermarket where you walk in and there's a lot of product off the shelf that you can then buy, but a platform is really a lot more than that. And that might have been where they started 20 years ago. Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a misconception that platforms haven't actually evolved or changed a lot in that time, and that's simply not true. But I think when things tend to evolve, or there's an evolution rather than a revolution, it can be hard to actually see the change over an extended period. But they've drastically changed, certainly since I started, given that we were pretty colours on a spreadsheet. But the sophistication of what we do now, the range of assets that we can administer, is vastly different. In relation to our competitors, we had to find a point of difference. We had to differentiate back in the early days. Our competitors were and still are the large banks, so the big four, AMP, IFF, etc. So they had very deep pockets, very well recognised brands. And so for us to grow and to continue to add value to our customer base, we had to look at new opportunities and try and do things differently that the others weren't doing. And, that pushed us into new markets like the international exchanges and, right back unlisted property syndicates, etc., that the other platforms weren't interested in doing.
Yeah, look, I'm just trying to, think about the fact that you are the managing director of an ASX-listed company. At the same time, you're a family man. And, I know you have a connection with James in the sense that both of you have twins. So I know that you've got Rafi and Sunday, and then you've got your oldest son, Harry, as well. And so managing the family and then also managing the business, which is harder and how do you do it?
Managing the business is much easier. Yeah, it's a good question. And my twins, Rafi and Sunday, they're 4.5, and my eldest, as you mentioned, Harry, he turns 7 in a couple of weeks. So if you dial that back in time, but many people would know this story, but my wife was heavily pregnant with the twins as we were going through the IPO process. So at one point when we were doing our non-deal roadshow, which is when you go out and test the market and speak to institutions before sort of launching or announcing a formal IPO, I had to disappear for a couple of weeks. So I was traveling around Australia. We went over to Asia, Hong Kong, New Zealand, to meet with a whole lot of institutional investors. And it's fair to say that my wife's friends, who were oblivious to what was actually going on in the background, didn't think I was a great bloke for disappearing for 2 weeks at such an important time in my wife's pregnancy. And it wasn't until we actually announced what I'd been doing that they gave me some relief, not a lot of relief, but but they said, okay, well, that's somewhat justified. But they actually were born between the non-deal roadshow and the IPO. So there was a lot happening in our house at the time. But I think COVID, in many ways, whilst it's been incredibly difficult for so many people, and clearly Victorians have felt it a lot worse than pretty much anywhere else in the world, it has been a great time with young family. We've spent more time together over the last couple of years than I think I would have probably over 10 years had COVID not occurred. And it's created some really good lifestyle habits. I'm still working very flexibly. We're actually living down down in Lawn at the moment where my kids are doing school. I'm in the office 3 days a week. So I drive down Tuesday morning for a couple of nights and do 3 days in the office, and then bookend it with catch-up days so I can do things like this podcast, etc., from the comfort of my home study. And it's been great. So I've been able to get fit. I'm running a lot more. I'm at the gym a lot more. But more importantly, I get to have breakfast and dinner with my kids a lot more. And I think that's really healthy, and it actually helps you be more productive at work. And it means that when you are at work, you can really focus on work. And I think that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, it struck me. We just went to a conference not too long ago, and it was quite obvious to me as I was about to get into my monologue about I don't have coffee for reasons of sleep, and I was about to explain to you all of these things. You showed me your ring, which was a sort of wellbeing ring that sort of monitors your sleep and so on, and you were all across it. And it struck me that, you know, someone who's so busy yet finds the time to make sure that you're looking after your health and your well-being. Where did that come from? Because I know, I mean, this is stereotyping. It's not generational. You know, it certainly doesn't come from our forefathers, this idea.
Well, they certainly didn't have Aura rings to keep them honest.
That's true.
So my wife's a big part of it. Before I got married, living typical bachelor life, I probably wasn't the fittest bloke. I was eating a lot of takeaway, burning the candle at both ends, so to speak. After I got married, rather than putting on weight, I actually lost about 20 kilos, I think it was at the time. And I'm not an overly tall bloke, so 20 kilos was actually quite a lot as a percentage. And so I've always, since that time, always had, a bit of a focus on fitness and keeping fit and eating well. The last couple of years, though, through COVID, gave me the time to really pause and to reset. And, one of the things that we think a lot about as a business, and it has an impact on how we work as well as how we live, is that it takes, on average, about 66 days to break a habit. So on the flip side of that, it takes 66 days to create a good habit. Mm-hmm. Now, we had plenty of time when we were at home to actually reset a lot of the things that we do. And we were doing a lot of work with the broader business. We had virtual PT sessions. We had health and wellness experts doing webinars to keep people focused. And through that, you sort of try to change your routine or do things that are going to improve not only your resilience, but mental health, but also your physical health. And I made some pretty big changes during that period. I could bore you for hours, but I'll try and keep it relatively succinct. I cut out gluten as an example, and that's been really important. Both my parents are celiac. I haven't actually got tested, but thought, look, why not? I'm here. I'll try cutting it out. And it's really helped with just general energy levels. I've got rid of a lot of the brain fog that I used to have in the morning, and it's actually easy to do once you focus on it. So that was quite a big change. I've completely changed my morning routine. So whilst it's not perfect every day, on a perfect day, typically I'd wake up a little bit early. I sleep with the blinds open now, which I've never done before. It's nice to have the sun in the morning. Big glass of water, some breathing exercises. Try desperately not to look at my phone until about 8 a.m. Because I find that the minute you pick up your phone, and anyone listening be aware of this, your mind's gone. You've checked out of the morning, you've checked out of the family, and you're thinking about work or what's happening in the markets, what's happening in Ukraine, etc. So certainly one of the best things you can do, and like I said, doesn't happen every morning, is to actually not look at your phone until you're ready to start work. And then mix in obviously some exercise with all of that. So
you've preempted some of the conversations that I'm potentially going to have with Dr. Adam Fraser, who talks about actually the third space and managing the micro transitions, the transitions from one place to another place. And you kind of, the way that you've kind of talked about the phone, it's kind of almost like a mindless bridge between home and work. And so to remove it can be really effective.
It's a portal into distraction.
Yeah, without doubt.
Whether it's WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, you've got everyone trying to compete for your attention. They're financially motivated to do it. And if anyone's interested in all this stuff, I've just finished a book called Stolen Focus. Now, you've got to take some of it with a grain of salt, but it's got some really interesting observations in there about all the things that we're talking about. So I highly recommend it. And then the last thing is, as you touched on, sleep is just so important. Like breathing, everyone thinks, well, yes, that's pretty obvious, but there is nothing like a good sleep to help ensure that you're going to have that appropriate family time, focus, and also work at your highest levels.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, just thinking about talking to you, a very significant theme is the Heine family and the cultural origins. And I know it dates back quite some time to I believe your great grandfather Walter. Is that right?
Goes further back than that, actually.
Does it? Okay.
So it goes back to 1864. I think I probably got that date slightly wrong, but no, it goes back many generations. It's a fascinating story, but I think as a family, we're not sort of there to pat ourselves on the back and say what a wonderful job we've done and celebrate our success. It's more about actually looking at the lessons from history. So what's gone wrong and what can we avoid in the future, and what can we learn from? And we've actually documented a lot of those lessons and formalising that a little bit at the moment. But I think when I look back over the many generations, the one thing that really stands out to me is just how entrepreneurial the family has been in everything that they've done. So going back to those early generations, they had a very successful fabric business in Germany, in Leipzig, based out of Leipzig. And they were basically the first ones that were almost doing clothing to order. So whether it was suits or pants or women's apparel, etc. And the way that they managed the business and grew the business was really impressive. And some of those early things that they did, whilst we might look at them now and not think they were particularly impressive, they were quite entrepreneurial and revolutionary at the time. And then my grandfather, through that period, ended up in Nazi Germany, ended up as a prisoner of war in Australia, at which point they realised that he was actually on our side, being the Australian side, being a German Jew. Got demobbed into the Australian Army with no English, no money, and subsequently went on to build up a very substantial business in Australia, and at one point was the largest importer-exporter of steel for BHP, and did all sorts of interesting things along the way.
That's incredible. So these stories, are they told quite regularly within your family? And I mean, are they almost honoured and revered in some way, and you communicate that across generations? How important is that to your family?
I think it is. It's really important. So Dad's actually done a great job of keeping a document up to date. And again, as I said, it's more about things that haven't gone well as opposed to the things that have gone well. And recently we've looked at formalising it. So by chance, my mother-in-law is a biographer. And so she's actually spent time with the family, done a lot of research, gone back to our roots, and written a more substantial book, which is purely for, I guess, internal reference. It's don't expect to see it on the shelves of any bookshop. But it was really important to us that as the generations passed on, that we did have a document, we had that history written down so that my kids can read it and understand it, their kids can read it and understand it, and no doubt, or hopefully, there'll be volume 1, 2, 3 over the years.
Absolutely. And do you think there are some specific learnings and takeaways that you have? And how important is the narrative to you in terms of keeping you motivated to do what you do? I'm
not sure if the narrative is what motivates me necessarily.
Okay.
I think that's sort of inherent maybe in the way that we're brought up. It's a difficult one to sort of pinpoint. Yeah. But a lot of lessons around, it's more probably practical things in many cases around gearing, not being too diversified in what you do and focusing on, your core businesses. Importantly, understanding when maybe a business is not the right business to be in. One of the key things that we've seen is that many people hang on to a family business because it's the family business, even if they don't necessarily see a future for it, and that can actually destroy wealth as quickly as you can build wealth. So, whilst we're certainly not traders or seek to trade in and out of companies, there's been pivotal moments through our history where it has made sense to exit the family business, and it's always been tough decisions, but I think it's always been for the right reasons.
What about the sort of key family values that you think actually have had a practical impact on the way you guys, differentiate yourselves as a service? Is there any of those family values that actually make its way through tangibly to the way that you interact with advisors, as an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of a passion of mine. We are absolutely a value-driven business, and we can talk a bit more about this. But when you boil it down, the values really, in many ways, I think reflect many of our family values as well. That tends to happen in founder-led businesses. And as we went through the exercise as a company, which would have been probably 3 or 4 years ago now, and I'm hoping to sort of retest them and to refresh them in the next year or so. We wanted to understand what it was in the early days, or what was it in our DNA in the early days that helped us build the business and that people were responding well to, that advisors noticed and responded well to, and how do we make sure that we embed that into our culture and the way that we work and operate well into the future. And a great way to do that is to really understand your values, but then it's important to embed those values and to really live those values. And there's a range of different ways that we do that. And so if you the values that we have at Netwealth as a business, we did the exercise. McKinsey would always suggest that you have no more than 3 values. We ended up with 6. And as we went through it, it's a bit like trying to pick your favourite child. Every department actually had a slightly different focus or preferred a handful of values over other values. So in the end, we decided that there was enough support for the 6 values that we would actually keep them. So the values that we have are courageous. So we think it's important to be bold and to not be afraid to sort of step outside the status quo, but not reckless. We think it's really important to be curious and to, again, challenge that status quo, but try and understand, what's going around in the broader ecosystem, what's going on locally, what's going on domestically, what's happening around the world that might impact our business or our clients or the way that we need to run the business, but also about, what each other are doing. So making sure that we don't operate in silos and that there is actually good collaboration across the business. And that's our third one, collaboration. Really important that we collaborate constantly internally, but also that we're collaborating with our clients and with the industry, and we do that in a range of different ways. So curious, collaborative, and courageous. Agile speaks for itself. We do move quickly. I think you have to in this market. Genuine and optimistic. So again, hopefully in your dealings with us, you can see elements of all of those values when you deal with us sort of on a day-to-day basis.
No, absolutely. And I figure that, if you don't have, firstly, a very strong understanding of your values, but then also a way of being able to implement these values into practical process and so on, then when you do become an ASX-listed company, there's a fair bit of dilution that could potentially occur, and you could lose some of that through that. Was there any experience of that? Did you fear that? Talk us around the change and the magnitude of the change of becoming an ASX-listed company.
Yeah, I think I'd have to look at some other prospectuses, but I would suggest that our prospectus probably had a far greater focus on values and purpose than you may expect from other ASX-listed companies. Probably took the investment bankers a bit by surprise, but it was really important to us, and we felt that as a business and a company, they did differentiate us from other businesses. And we just come out of the GFC, and I think it had been proved time and time again that you can't just have big buzzwords on your reception desk around integrity, trust. They're sort of tickets to the game, and we feel that that's an expectation from you and our customers that they can trust us and that we're going to deal with integrity. Values are really about what differentiates you as a business and what's going to ensure that you're successful in the future. So we did spend a lot of time on those values. And just to go back a step, from a day-to-day perspective and how we embed them into the business, we have regular sort of town halls. We have regular value awards where we recognise and nominate people for role modelling particular values across the business. And in the last 12 to 18 months, maybe 2 years, you sort of lose track of time with what's happened over the last couple of years, we actually removed KPIs from our review process. So we do quarterly check-ins, and then we do a more formal or a longer half-yearly review process, which is purely based on values. So we're working on the assumption that if we've employed you and you continue to be employed, that you're doing your job and that you're meeting your KPIs. That becomes an expectation. So what we want to reward from our staff and to encourage from our staff is that they role model and contribute to our business through their behaviours, and that aligns directly back to those values. So at the end of the year, they basically get a role model or a role model rating, valuable contributor, or an aligned rating, or in some cases an opportunity to improve. But that is a reflection of how they've behaved in line with those 6 values that we just talked about.
If someone isn't performing from a values standpoint, is it unlikely that they'd be meeting their KPIs?
Most likely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you actually start to work through what each of the values really means in practice, many of them would actually, if you were failing or had an opportunity to improve on any of those values, there is a very high likelihood that you would actually be underperforming on those KPIs.
Makes a lot of sense. Yep, go on. Yep.
So I was going to say, to answer your actual question, just about on a little bit of a hobby horse. To answer your question, look, we're probably, again, pretty fortunate as we went through the IPO process in that by virtue of the fact that we had always run the company as if it was a listed business, given my father's background operating in listed environments, but also the nature of the industry we're in, where we are regulated by basically every regulator in the country. Going from an unlisted company to a listed company was not a big step. So all of our financials, were in great shape. We had a lot of governance. We had a lot of committees set up, the board structures, independent directors, et cetera, et cetera. So in that regard, it was very different for us than, say, you were in another industry, petrol stations, whatever it might be, where it's a very different environment that you'd be operating in. So through the process, we only added one additional committee, which was the Market Disclosure Committee, who basically signs off on any announcements to the market. But otherwise, there wasn't any major structural changes. The big challenge for any business, particularly when they list, is you need to make sure that you can retain that long-term focus, because the market is obsessed with quarterly results and quarterly returns, and that can drive the wrong behaviours if not managed internally. So again, as we go through the process of business planning, strategy planning, and all the rest of it, if we feel that there is decisions that are being made for the wrong reasons, it's really important that the executive or the board ask the question, if we weren't listed, is this the decision that we would still be making? And if the answer is no, then there's a reasonable chance that it's not the right decision. Gotcha.
Interesting. You've mentioned your father on a number of occasions already. He's a pretty important person, obviously, in your life. How is it like working with him?
Well, the way I look at it, I've worked with him for 43 years now. It just happens that 22 of those have been in a more formal setting.
Yeah, so you obviously, has the relationship changed over time? How's it been from a working relationship point of view?
Yeah, I think relationships are always going to change over time. Clearly, we when I grew up with him, we were living in a household. Even after school and after university, we all lived together. So it was my old man, myself, and my brother in a share house, if you like, for many years. I think we kicked him out when I was 26 and said it's time for you to get your own place, Dad. And then I got married and had kids, and so that changes things. From a work perspective, though, we've certainly over time, as he sort of got older, I've taken on more responsibility. I've got the executive reporting through to me now, and that's been the case for a number of years, but he's still very much involved in the business. We get together on sort of all the big major strategic decisions, and we'll often discuss just sort of broader items more generally. So I think it's a good relationship, but all relationships evolve over time.
Yeah, and I was really happy to hear Michael's talk about the disease of relevance deprivation. Can you explain this a bit? And what has Michael done to really allow you to flourish within the business as well?
I think you'd have to ask him about that. I don't know if he heard the term from someone else or if he's come up with it. But, look, I think again, as the business has grown, and I've proved that I was up to the job, I've been given more responsibility over time, and I've taken on different roles and different activities. So with the way that we share day-to-day responsibilities now is very different to what it was 5 years ago and certainly 20 years ago, where I don't need as much adult supervision, but probably still a bit. Yeah.
Do you think that that's how you've kept passionate about the business as well, that you've been able to sort of change your roles to suit your kind of innate talents?
Absolutely. So in any business, you have to recognise and play to your strengths. There's no point banging away at something or trying to do something that either you're not good at or that you can't do. It's not helping you, and it's not helping the people around you. So really important that you understand the blind spots, surround yourself with excellent people, but also that you focus on the things where you can add value. And so my natural lean is towards sort of product sales, marketing, strategy, business growth. I've got to be across compliance, accounting, and all the rest of it. Not passionate about them, but really important in my role clearly as joint MD. So, we make sure that you set up structures and people and a team around you, because ultimately to be successful you have to have a fantastic team, and I think we've got one of the best at Netwealth.
Yeah, and do you feel like there's ever a sense of like obligation or feeling that the pressure to keep the family tradition going in that sense? Is there any of that weight at all ever?
The business that we're in today is totally different to anything that we've ever done. So it'd be hard to point to a family tradition in that regard, other than I guess the values and running the business in a way that we believe is aligned with those values. We are still a large family. It gets hard when you've got 500 plus staff. But if you ask people to describe the culture or to describe what an executive meeting is, it's a bit like sitting around a family table where everyone's sort of talking over the top of each other. But that when the room goes quiet, it's usually because we've found the right answer. Yeah.
Now, your brother, I believe his name's Nick. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So Nick, Nick hasn't actually joined Netwealth or worked with Netwealth. So what's the journey been like for him, and was there any pressure to come into the business?
I think he's an unofficial advisor to the business, so he will text message me very regularly to ask why the share price. And when I say very regularly, multiple times during the day, why is the share price up? Why is the share price down? And he's actually very interested in what we do, clearly. But has some great questions, and he challenges us and regularly wants to know why Google can't do what we're doing, and all those sort of big, hard-hitting macro questions, which I usually don't have an answer for. But he went through university, he's actually, I think, the only one within our direct family that has a degree. He's got a degree in industrial design. He's now heading up the innovation lab at Moose Toys. So he's very technically minded. The stuff that he can do with 3D modelling is incredible, and certainly well beyond my capabilities. And no, I don't think there was any pressure. I landed at Netwealth when I was 19, 20, part-time, and then I sort of became full-time when I realised it was far more interesting, and I was learning a lot more than being at uni, and never actually finished it. Whereas he clearly had a passion and was much better in the space that he is. So he's also been at his company Moose for the last 20 years. Moose is one of Australia's most incredible also family stories, where Manny Stool and Paul Solomon basically took a small business and turned it into one of the world's largest toy companies over that 20 year period. So Nick's been along there for that journey and seen that rise. So he's also able to sort of discuss scaling and all those sort of things with us. And many of the experiences he's had have been not dissimilar to our own.
So a real innovator and entrepreneur in very much in a similar sense, your brother.
In relation to design and toys, absolutely.
Yeah.
He gets to play with exploding packaging.
Is there still sea monkeys?
Would you believe I've just got sea monkeys for my kids? I just
they're the best. They're the best.
I just fed them about 2 hours ago because the kids are desperate for a dog, and probably going well off track here. But we said to them, when you're all out of nappies, we can think about a dog. And so now they're all out of nappies. They want to know where their dog is, and we're not going to get one. So I thought sea monkeys was the next best thing.
That's hilarious. I feel like, multi-generational families, entrepreneurial families tend to be quite intentional around thinking about the future. So do you think there was like a mechanism set out that if Nick, as an example, or a future Nick didn't want to be in the business, that there was obviously a possibility in a way that he didn't have to, there was never that pressure because there was a clear thought process in not having to have him as part of it, or any sort of pressure. Do you think that's true?
Whether it was intentional or an outcome, I'm not sure. Again, I don't think there was ever pressure for either of us to go into the business. We're all living together in the same share house when Dad started Netwealth, and it was literally he'd sit up in his bedroom tapping away, and we were sort of obviously observing what he was doing. But at the time, it was pretty apparent that Nick was creative, and he was going down a different path to what I was.
Yeah. Do you think, in just terms of your life lessons, do you think that sort of enterprising families do not break down because of wealth? They usually break down because relationships fall apart. Do you think that that's true?
So I'm involved in a number of different networking groups, and these are the topics that get discussed regularly. And I think families have similar problems and different problems, and every situation, different personalities, etc., will lead to different outcomes. One of the great terms that I remember hearing very early on when I was sort of participating in some of these forums and family office forums was the role of the CEO of a family office. And you go, yeah, know what that means, but I said, no, it's not what you think. It's actually Chief Emotional Officer. And basically, whilst they were the CEO of the family office, they spent more of their time working with different family members to resolve conflict and to deal with the emotions that they were going through. So, look, I think like any family, it's a different set of challenges, and it's very hard to say, look, it's going to be one or the other. It really does depend.
Yeah. So we've heard this this saying, and I had a recording with Mike Boyd, who talked of the old proverb, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. Now, you've had many generations and iterations in your family. What elements in your childhood do you kind of point out as being allowing you to set you up for success, do you think?
Yeah, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. It's a great saying. I think it's proved itself many times. I don't know which generation I am.
Right.
Because it's sort of, over the time, the family's been successful, lost everything due to war, etc., started up again. So it's very difficult to know where the generation starts. But I'd like to think that I'm not third generation, because that just puts way too much pressure on me for no reason. So I've forgotten the question now.
Yeah, so it's just really, the question is really about what sort of elements in your childhood can you point out that kind of lends itself to, you being the person you are and, being a success in the sense of entrepreneurship?
Nature versus nurture is always a good question, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that both are strong influences. And again, in my own family, my brother's 15 months younger, so we're very similar ages. He's gone down one path and I've gone down another, but we do certainly share sort of an entrepreneurial spirit, but also an interest in financial markets, etc. So we were always very involved in discussions from a very early age. So, sitting around the kitchen table, Dad was very open and transparent in the good times, but also the bad times. And, there were plenty of both. We'd talk about the markets. I bought my first shares, I think, at the age of 6 or 7. And I've just done the same with my son, Harry, which I'd love to chat about.
Yes, let's talk about that. Yeah.
And so it was sort of always part of the conversation. And so business, again, I said I've worked with Dad for 43 years. It was sort of discussed at the kitchen table. It wasn't the only topic, clearly, but it does become, or it's more natural than maybe it is for some others, where they go through life not really understanding maybe their parents' situation, or what they do as an occupation, or whether they're wealthy or not.
Yeah, it seems like from generation to generation, it may be that financial means has not been passed on every single time, but certainly there seems to be a connection between the actual education around wealth creation and the education around being entrepreneurial that seems to have been passed on from generation to generation, which has lent itself to success. Would that be, and I mean, the podcast is called It's Never About Money, and in a sense, it's kind of relevant to that point, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And, success, wealth, whatever word you want to choose, means very different things to different people. And again, this is a regular discussion, which is, what does it mean to you?
Yeah.
Is it about the fact that you can give more to the community that you live in? Is it that you can try and change the world through impact investments? Is it about giving your kids the greatest opportunity to do something great with their life? There's so many things that it can mean, and what does success in life mean? Will mean different things to different people. But I think there is a recognition now that there are options, and that people can, to some extent, follow their passion and live meaningful lives.
We talked about your kids. You want them to be enterprising. We talked about at the conference. Another great thing that we talked about was the way you were sort of educating them around stocks. So let's talk about that, because that's quite interesting.
Well, I think my wife would love the kids to be tradies, which, to be honest, I think is probably not a bad career path. And we seem to have one coming around to our place most days because I'm hopeless. But I think it's financial literacy is clearly critical, and it's one of those life skills that we are heavily invested into as a business. And if we've got time, I'd love to talk a bit about banker.
Yeah, absolutely.
But financial literacy is one part of it. Financial capability is the second part, and probably the more important part. And to differentiate between those two, you can learn the theory of money, but until you've experienced losing money or earning money or spending money, it's a very different outcome. And so what's particularly challenging at the moment, and what concerns me greatly as a parent and maybe many other parents, is the value of money is very hard for a child to grasp these days. Money has gone invisible. So if you rewind, even 10 years, or certainly when we were growing up, you had $2 coins, you had $10 notes. If you saw a $50 note, you're like, wow. And if you saw a $100 note, you're like, wow. But you actually understood the value of money. You could see the value of different notes and of a currency. But more importantly, when you received your pocket money or when you got your first job, you were able to easily connect the effort, the job and the input with the outcome and the money that you received as a result. Now, when you just go to an ATM or when you tap for food or when you jump in an Uber and there's no exchange of money, the concept of value has disappeared. So I just got some takeaway. Do the kids know how much it costs because they just hit order? And even then, does $44 mean anything to them? So how do you actually give them that concept of value and certainly what sits behind the numbers? And I think it's going to be a real challenge. And there's different sort of tech companies that are trying to solve that. There's a great one that I'm going to start looking into over the next week called Spriggy.
Yes, that just started. I saw that there was some marketing around that somewhere. I saw. Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
it's actually been going for a number of years, and it's a debit card for kids, but it's got the concept of saving, spending, giving, and I think those three buckets and that bucket approach, which no doubt you talk about with some of your clients, it is really important, and it gets your kids thinking about, okay, well, if I earn some money, yes, I could spend it, but that means that I can't save up for the Nintendo Switch or whatever it might be. But equally, I need to think about giving and what does that mean, and who do I want to give it to? Do I want to give it to flood relief? Do I want to give it to the gentleman that's always standing on the corner near the supermarket? And again, if you can do it with cash, even better. I haven't had cash for years now, so we do need to find different ways to do it. And as a business, and again something I'm very passionate about, we've sponsored now and fund or fully fund for a number of years a program called Banker.
Yes.
Which is a financial literacy and financial capability program that is available to all schools in Australia. So year on year, we put about 10 to 15,000 children through this program.
Yes.
And effectively, it's a virtual economy. So every kid in the classroom gets their own bank account, super account, investment account.
Wow.
And they get rewarded, or they get paid for having different jobs in the classroom. So it could be the chair stacker, it could be the whiteboard cleaner. They can apply for different roles in the classroom. So they have to complete a CV and put a job application in. They can buy a house. The program is actually from New Zealand, and I always find this one a little bit awkward because the teacher can then trigger national disasters like earthquakes. And so if the kids haven't bought insurance for their house, the house gets demolished.
Yep.
And that really helps kids, I think, understand what I was talking about before. That's the difference between financial literacy, learning the basics of how to calculate compound interest, and actually seeing your bank account, which is growing because you're receiving interest, or because you've got a new job, and they get the option to invest into a conservative or a high growth portfolio. We're talking about 8 to 10-year-olds here. They're having retirement parties at the end of each year where they'll come dressed in their grandparents' clothes and can celebrate how much money they've saved over the year. So really good life lessons that we hope will set them up really well for their life, their future life. And the theory being that if you can teach good lessons at the start, it's easier than trying to change bad habits at the end. And
you're really getting them to sort of not just understand the theory from a cognitive basis, but you're actually engaging with their limbic system, how they're going to feel about the consequences of their actions. And I think that is what you so eloquently described before in terms of the invisibility of money. There's no real consequence of actions. There's no real understanding. And so this type of a program seems amazing. So call out to parents out there that are at schools, this is available. This should be, highlighted and expressed to the principals of, every school out there. It's financial literacy has been a problem for some time.
Absolutely. Our objective would be to have every child in Australia going through the program, but there's a lot of competing pressures. Financial literacy is not always high on the agenda, unfortunately, for schools. I think there's still debate about who's responsible for it, but it is critical. We would love to fund your child through the program. So Google it, look it up. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you want more information.
And I love the you were talking about how you were talking to Harry about the stocks and how he selected his stocks. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was looking at just around pocket money and reward recognition, trying to curate or encourage the right behaviours, which anyone with young children would know is not always that easy, was that if he was to put his pocket money, or if he earned money, call it $5, into his investment account, that I would actually match it and double it. Now, as a financial planner, there's not going to be many investments that return 100% like that, but he cottoned onto it pretty quickly. It was risk-free. And so he started to put money into his investment account. And the beauty of it was I could literally transfer it from my bank account into his investment account. It was instant, which is really important. I think that the kids see that instant recognition. And so he built up enough money to start actually buying some stocks. So the service that I use allows fractional share ownership. And so we started talking about, what might you want to invest into? And he's like, well, what does that mean? And I said, you can own a part of a company that you really like. What are some of the companies that you really like? And so the first one that he decided to buy, and he bought $25 of this particular company, was Alphabet. And again, yes, I was helping him with the concepts, but I didn't pick the stocks. So I think that's really important. So he picked Alphabet, and I said, well, why is that? And he didn't know it was called Alphabet, but because he uses YouTube a lot. Whilst I don't necessarily approve of it, he watches online gamers and all that sort of rubbish, but loves YouTube and YouTube Kids and some of those programs. So he's like, well, who owns YouTube? And he understood that when he clicks on ads or if he buys things, that this company gets money. And I said, well, that means that you can get a share of the money that they earn. And he's like, oh, that's cool. So he bought $25 of Alphabet. He then asked me who owned Minecraft, and I had to look that up. I didn't actually know.
What's Minecraft, firstly, and then
exactly. And so it turns out Microsoft bought Minecraft for $8 billion. So he wanted to buy Microsoft, and that was a great discussion because I was able to say, well, Microsoft's actually a lot of the tools that Dad uses when he goes to work. So if I'm sending emails, so that was a really good conversation. And then the third one he picked was Apple because he does all of it on his iPad and sees Mum and Dad on their phones a lot. So he bought $50 of Apple. So I thought that's not a bad share portfolio to start with.
Heavy in tech.
Yeah, well, to be honest, the portfolio was probably a lot better than about a month ago than what it was now. So when he asked me how's my investment account going, I have to sort of say, well,
long term.
But again, great conversation, and even little things like having to explain that we had to convert his Australian dollars into US dollars because the companies were listed over in the US. Again, concept that a 6-year-old probably wouldn't have come across otherwise. But now he understands well. And my favourite discussion was when he said, well, Dad, can I buy some of your company, Netwealth? And I said, no, far too much paperwork. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, because I'd have to go to the board to get approval for you to buy $25 worth of Netwealth. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, well, because as a business and as a business leader, I have a lot more information than the rest of the market. And so it's only fair if people are buying shares where everyone has the same amount of information. And so, again, that's something you really
So there's another concept. Yeah, there's another concept he's taught very early. I mean, this is intentional, Matt. That's why I was so impressed with it. It's intentional that you're really not presuming that your kid won't be able to actually absorb this information, but giving them the information and seeing whether they can take it. And clearly he's taking it in. So it's great.
And it's all bite-sized bits of information, generates good discussion, and it's something he's now interested in. Yeah,
it's awesome. So just, what keeps you up at night? Matt, and what's still to do?
Just the kids.
Still not getting any sleep.
No, they've decided they like to sleep in our bed a lot at the moment.
Okay.
Hopefully that changes.
Yeah.
Look, there's always plenty to do. I think any business has many of the same challenges. Particularly at the moment. There's a lot going on in the world. There are a lot of things to think about. The situation in Ukraine and Russia is clearly less than desirable. There's a lot of macro sort of headwinds that we're all facing into. But as you sort of work through a lot of those things, I think at the end of the day, you need to focus on what you can control. A lot of it is, it's happening. We need to be aware of it. But a lot of these things we can't do anything about. So by focusing on what we can control, so making sure that you run a great business, that you're doing everything as well as you can, and making the right decisions and investing into the right things, they're the sort of things that I like to think more about rather than necessarily what I can't control.
Mm-hmm. If you fast forward 20 years, which is quite challenging, Matt, because you're still quite young, you'd be 63, I imagine?
Mm-hmm.
What would you want your kids to be saying about you?
Good bloke. I don't know, Joe. I hadn't actually thought about it, but it's a good question that I will think about.
Yep.
Yeah. Look. I'd hope that we still had a great relationship, that we had an open relationship where they were happy to discuss things with me.
Yeah.
And that we were still having a lot of fun together.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about the name of the podcast, does it actually resonate with you? What comes to mind when you think about It's Never About Money?
Oh, I think it's a great name for a podcast, and it's very true. At the end of the day, money is a means
Yes.
to do the things that we want, but it's important to understand what those things are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the last most curly question to round it out, Matt, what's your spirit animal and why?
What's my spirit animal and why? I wish you'd given me some of these questions before.
It's always going to be a question without notice, Matt, because then the strange animals come up.
We actually did this. I was out with a whole lot of friends, and we went around the table and gave each other the animals that we thought they were, and I can't remember what they came back with for me. What's my spirit animal? Oh.
I reckon your dad might be a horse.
A horse.
He loves his horses. I just remember how affectionate he loved his horse.
Horses are very intelligent.
They are intelligent creatures.
Yeah, incredible ability to know what's going on. Joe, I'm going to have to take that on notice as well.
That's fine.
It's too early in the morning.
I got you. That's good. You
did.
Look, you've been amazing, Matt. It's been. I'm so glad that we got you on. So many insights, so many lessons. It's been a pleasure to watch you from afar and the business go from strength to strength. I'm very grateful, and the community is very grateful to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Good fun.
I hope that this one was enjoyable to listen to and there were some moments of value. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.